Once upon a time, in the remote African village of Aam, life was simple yet filled with challenges. The villagers, hard-working and close-knit, lived in harmony but faced one pressing problem. Many of their young girls were dropping out of school due to early pregnancies. The dreams of these young minds, once so full of hope, were being snatched away too soon. Hearing of this plight, the government decided to intervene. They sought someone with both knowledge and charisma to educate the girls, guide them on making better choices, and help them protect their futures. That someone was Mr. Dante, a young and talented teacher from the bustling town of Ibukan. Known for his eloquence and charm, Mr. Dante had a reputation for captivating his students and leaving a lasting impact wherever he went. When news of his assignment reached Aam, the villagers were ecstatic. "He's coming to save our daughters," they whispered. "He will teach them about life, about protecting themselves." Hope spread like wildfire, and preparations were made to welcome him. On the day of his arrival, the entire village gathered under the great Ioko tree. The elders donned their finest robes, their faces beaming with anticipation. Baba Ani, the village patriarch, stepped forward to greet Mr. Dante. "Teacher Dante," he began, his voice steady and wise, "our daughters are like flowers in a storm. We need you to shield them, to show them the path of wisdom and strength." Mr. Dante nodded solemnly. "I am here to guide them," he replied, "to teach them how to make wise decisions, to value their education above all else, and to protect their futures." His words, spoken with conviction, filled the hearts of the villagers with hope. Soon Mr. Dante began his work. Unlike previous teachers, he had a unique approach that instantly captured the students' attention. Instead of reprimanding or lecturing, he spoke gently, weaving his lessons into captivating stories. Classes were held under the shade of the big mango tree, where the girls sat on wooden benches, eagerly listening to his every word. One day, during a lesson on health and safety, Mr. Dante held up a condom. "This," he said, "is not just an object. It is a shield, one that protects you from mistakes that could cost you your future." His calm and thoughtful explanation resonated deeply with the girls. He reminded them that their education was their key to a better life and that nothing should jeopardize it. The parents, watching from a distance, marveled at the change in their daughters. "This teacher Dante is a blessing," they said. "See how our girls run to school now. He has opened their eyes to a brighter future." But as time passed, admiration for Mr. Dante began to grow into something more complicated. His charming smile, his kind words, and the way he made each girl feel seen and valued stirred emotions they didn't fully understand. They began to look up to him not just as a teacher, but as someone they deeply trusted. At first, his actions seemed harmless. A gentle hand on a shoulder, a warm compliment like, "You're so smart. One day, you'll achieve great things." These words filled the girls with pride, wrapping them in the warmth of his encouragement. But soon, his behavior became more complex, blurring the lines between mentor and something else. One sunny afternoon, after a particularly engaging lesson on the dangers of unprotected sex, Mr. Dante clapped his hands to get the girls' attention. "You've all listened well," he began, his voice steady yet inviting. "But understanding doesn't stop at words. Sometimes, learning is better with practice." The girls exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what he meant. Mr. Dante smiled, sensing their confusion. "Don't worry," he reassured them. "This is to help you prepare for the future, to ensure you can protect yourselves." His words hung in the air, their meaning unclear yet intriguing. What kind of practice was he referring to? Aduni, one of the most promising girls in the village, began to notice changes in herself after one of Mr. Dante's private lessons. At first, she dismissed the nausea and the heaviness in her body, thinking it was merely fatigue. She focused on her studies, determined not to let anything derail her dreams. But as the weeks went by, her symptoms became harder to ignore. Her stomach swelled slightly, her energy waned, and whispers began to circulate among her classmates. "Have you noticed Aduni?" some murmured. "She doesn't seem like herself." But no one dared to ask her directly. One evening, as she fetched water from the village well, Aduni finally confided in her closest friend, Aoife. "I think something is wrong with me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Aoife, wide-eyed with concern, pressed for details. "What do you mean? Have you told your parents?" Aduni shook her head. "I can't. They wouldn't understand. They'd be ashamed." Her voice cracked as tears welled in her eyes. "It's Mr. Dante. He said what happened was normal, but now I feel different." Aoife's heart sank. She, too, had been called into the room, and though she had remained silent about her own experience, she now realized Aduni wasn't the only one. "Aduni," she said cautiously, "you're not alone. He did the same to me." The two girls stared at each other, the weight of their shared secret pressing down on them. Slowly, they began to piece together the truth, that Mr. Dante's actions were not lessons, but something far darker. Meanwhile, Marco and Dante continued their twisted partnership, growing bolder with each passing day. The girls they exploited kept silent, bound by fear and shame. Marco, reveling in his newfound power, whispered threats into their ears. "Don't even think about telling anyone," he would say, his grin menacing. "No one will believe you." But as the weeks turned into months, the shadows of their deeds began to unravel. It was Aduni who finally broke the silence. One morning, unable to bear the weight of her secret any longer, she approached Baba Ani, the village elder. With tears streaming down her face, she told him everything about Mr. Dante, about Marco, and about the shame she and the other girls had endured. Baba Ani listened in stunned silence, his face darkening with each word. When Aduni finished, he stood, his voice trembling with anger. "This cannot go unpunished," he declared. The elder called an emergency meeting under the great Ioko tree. Parents, teachers, and villagers gathered, their murmurs growing louder as the story spread. Aduni, trembling but resolute, stood before them and recounted her experience. As her words rang out, other girls stepped forward, their voices shaky but firm. "It happened to me too," one said. "And me," another added. Soon, the truth was laid bare, and the village erupted in outrage. Marco, sensing the storm brewing, tried to flee, but the villagers caught him before he could escape. Dragged to the center of the gathering, he was forced to face the consequences of his actions. As for Mr. Dante, he was summoned but refused to come willingly. When the villagers finally confronted him, he attempted to deny everything. "These are lies," he shouted. "They're trying to ruin my reputation." But the evidence was undeniable. The testimonies of the girls, the whispered accounts of Marco's demands, and the pieces of Dante's own lessons all painted a damning picture. Baba Ani stood tall, his voice booming with authority. "You came to our village as a teacher, a guide, and a protector. Instead, you have brought shame and pain to our daughters. Your betrayal will not go unpunished." The villagers decided that justice would be swift. Marco and Dante were expelled from AAM, banished to live in disgrace far from the community they had wronged. In the aftermath, the village came together to heal. New teachers were brought in, this time women from nearby towns who vowed to rebuild trust and guide the girls with compassion and respect. The parents, once hesitant to discuss these topics, became active participants in their children's education, ensuring such horrors would never happen again. Aduni, despite the pain she endured, emerged as a beacon of strength. She continued her studies, determined to become a teacher herself, one who would truly protect and uplift the young minds in her care. And so, the village of AAM slowly began to rebuild, learning that even in the darkest of times, truth and unity could pave the way for brighter tomorrows. The mothers gathered under the great Ioko tree, their faces a mix of worry and determination. Mama Aduni spoke first, her voice steady, but tinged with fear. "Something is not right," she said, holding up the cassava she had been peeling earlier. "Our daughters are not themselves." Mama Moreo nodded, her brows furrowed. "Moreo avoids me now. Her clothes don't fit, and she eats like a bird. What's happening to our girls?" The other mothers chimed in, sharing similar concerns. Whispers turned into shared revelations as the pieces of a troubling puzzle began to take shape. "Aduni has been sick for weeks," one said. "My daughter won't even look me in the eye," added another. Baba Ani, the village elder, listened from the edge of the gathering, his cane resting against the tree. He raised a hand, and the murmurs ceased. "There is only one way to find the truth," he declared. "We must ask the girls directly." The next morning, under the elder's supervision, the girls were called to the schoolyard. Their faces were pale, their steps hesitant. Aduni stood among them, her hands clenched into fists. She glanced at Moreo, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. Baba Ani's voice boomed, commanding attention. "Daughters of Aam, we have gathered here because your mothers are worried. You have changed, and we fear something has harmed you. Speak to us openly. What has happened?" The girls exchanged nervous glances. Silence hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Then Aduni stepped forward, her legs trembling. "Baba," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "It's Mr. Dante." The crowd stirred, gasps rippling through the villagers. Baba Ani raised his hand again for silence. "What about Mr. Dante?" he asked gently. Aduni's eyes filled with tears, but she stood firm. "He calls us for private lessons," she said, her voice stronger now. "But it's not lessons. He does things." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, ashamed. Moreo stepped forward next, her hand gripping Aduni's for support. "He did the same to me," she said, her voice trembling but clear. One by one, the other girls found their courage and spoke. Each story echoed the others: Dante's deceit, his manipulation, and their silence born from fear. The villagers erupted in outrage. Fathers clenched their fists, mothers wept openly, and the elders exchanged grim looks. Baba Ani, his face dark with anger, slammed his cane into the ground. "Bring him here," he commanded. When Mr. Dante was dragged to the gathering, his usual charm was gone, replaced by a look of panic. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice wavering. Baba Ani stepped forward, his voice thunderous. "You came to this village as a teacher, a protector of our children. Instead, you betrayed them. Do you deny these accusations?" Dante's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. "These are lies," he shouted. "These girls are trying to ruin me." But the girls stood united, their voices steady. "We're telling the truth," Aduni said, her chin raised defiantly. Baba Ani turned to Marco, who had been lurking at the edge of the crowd. "And you," he said, pointing his cane at him. "What do you know of this?" Marco hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. I saw things," he stammered. "But I didn't. I wasn't." His words faltered under the piercing gaze of the elder. The villagers demanded justice. Dante and Marco were stripped of their positions and dragged to the outskirts of the village. Baba Ani addressed the crowd one final time. "These men will leave Aam and never return. Their actions have brought shame upon themselves, not upon our daughters. We will protect our children and ensure they never suffer like this again." As the men were cast out, the village began to heal. The girls found solace in one another, their shared pain forging unbreakable bonds. Aduni, her strength unwavering, decided to dedicate her life to teaching, not just lessons from books but lessons of courage, self-respect, and the power of speaking the truth. Under the great Ioko tree, the mothers vowed to be more vigilant, to listen to their children, and to protect them fiercely. Aam had faced a darkness, but together, its people ensured that the light would prevail. Their faces heavy with worry, the mothers gathered under the ancient baobab tree. "Something is wrong," Mama Aduni said, her voice trembling. "Our daughters are not the same." "Yes," Mama Moore agreed, her eyes glistening with unease. "They hide their faces like criminals and their bodies, they are changing." Baba Ani, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "This is no coincidence," he said, his voice deep and steady. "We must find the truth. Call the girls and ask them if they know what's going on." The villagers nodded in agreement. The time for silence had passed. That evening, The mothers and elders gathered their daughters beneath the mango tree. The air was thick with tension, and even the stars above seemed dim, as though they too were troubled. Baba Ani stood tall, his voice cutting through the silence, like a clap of thunder. "Speak," he commanded. "What is troubling you? Why are you hiding from us?" The girls exchanged fearful glances, their secrets locked tightly in their hearts. None of them dared to speak, but the parents were relentless, questioning them one by one. The tension escalated with every denial until finally, Aduni broke down. Her tears fell like rain as her voice shook. "It was Mr. Dante," she confessed. "He called us for private lessons and said it was to help us. But it wasn't true. He lied to us." A gasp rippled through the gathering. Mama Moore covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. As if Aduni's confession opened a floodgate, the other girls began to speak. "It's true," Moro said, tears streaming down her face. "He made us trust him, and then she choked on her words, unable to finish. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. One of the girls, her hands trembling, added, "It wasn't just him. He sent us to Marco, too. He said Marco would continue the lessons." The crowd erupted in anger. Betrayal burned like fire in their hearts. "Dante and Marco," Baba Ani bellowed. "They have ruined our daughters." The parents, now consumed by rage, decided they wouldn't wait. They would confront Dante and Marco that very night. "Bring torches," Baba Ani ordered. "We will go to Dante's house. He must face the consequences of his actions." The villagers moved as one, their anger lighting the dark night like a wildfire. Justice was coming, and no one would escape it. Meanwhile, Marco lounged outside, chewing on a twig, when he overheard two women near the well. "The parents know," one of them whispered, her voice sharp like a whip crack. "They're going to Dante's house tonight. He's finished." Marco's heart jumped. He spat out the twig and ran as fast as his legs could carry him to Dante's house. Bursting through the door, he found Dante calmly writing on a slate, unaware of the storm brewing outside. "Dante," Marco panted, his chest heaving. "They know. The parents are coming for you. They've found out everything." Dante's hand froze, the color draining from his face. "What do you mean, everything?" "I mean everything," Marco hissed. "The girls have spoken. They know what we've done." For a moment, Dante stood frozen, his mind racing. Then, like a man drowning, he latched onto the first thought that came to him. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling.
"Now."
The two men packed hastily, shoving clothes and valuables into bags. "We'll go to the town," Dante said. "No one will find us there." "But what if the gods are watching?" Marco asked nervously. "They won't expect us to leave so soon," Dante replied. "We'll slip through the boundary, before they even notice." As the parents gathered in the village square, Dante and Marco crept into the shadows, heading toward the path that led out of the village. Their hearts pounded with fear, each step echoing like thunder in their ears. Unknown to them, Baba Ani, suspecting their escape, had already sent a message to the village guards to block the boundary. As Dante and Marco approached the gate, relief washed over them. "We're almost out," Dante whispered. But just as they reached the gate, a sharp voice rang out. "Stop there." The men froze. From the shadows, the village guards emerged, their spears glinting in the moonlight. "Looking for something?" one of the guards asked, his tone cold and commanding. We were just going for a walk," Marco stammered. The guard laughed. "A walk? In the middle of the night? With bags on your back? You're not going anywhere." Before they could flee, the guards seized them, tying their hands with thick ropes. News of their capture spread like wildfire. By the time Dante and Marco were dragged back to the square, the entire community was waiting, their faces grim with anger and betrayal. Baba Ani stepped forward, his voice booming. "You thought you could harm our daughters and run away? You will face justice here, in front of everyone." The crowd roared in agreement, their torches blazing like the fury in their hearts. Dante and Marco, once confident in their deceit, now stood trembling, knowing their punishment would be swift and severe. As the punishment unfolded, the village began to heal. The girls, though scarred, found solace in their family's love and protection. The elders introduced strict measures to safeguard the future, ensuring such betrayal would never happen again. Though the scars of betrayal remained, Ami village stood stronger, united by the shared lesson of trust, resilience, and justice.